Vice Dean of Research in the College of Medicine, of course, in our college. And together with my colleagues, in particular Kelly and Patricia, I would like to welcome you to the keynote lecture. Before I start introducing our speaker, may I acknowledge that we are all today on a Treaty 6 territory, a traditional home of the King, and we pay respects to the ancestors of this place and reaffirm relationship to each other. With this preamble, let me a couple of minutes about the topic of our keynote presentation, which will be given by Dr. Richard Huntsman. The topic is cannabis. Who doesn't know about cannabis in Canada now? Hand up. I think everyone knows. After 17th of October, when the cannabis became legalized, with of course a lot of repercussions still to be appreciated. The industry is thrilled. The profits are going to be sky high. The Canadian Medical Association is less thrilled, as it expressed in its recent editorial. So that's the one part of the story, recreational cannabis and the societal repercussions. However, today will not be about the recreational cannabis, will be about something different, extremely exciting. And this excitement is due to the fact that our body contains a lot of proteins that can respond to cannabis. Moreover, our body contains also some endocannabinoids, endogenous lipid mediators that can actually stimulate the cannabis-induced pathways. How is that for the excitement and for the pharmacological and therapeutical opportunities to modify the pathway? All of this will be in the keynote address of Dr. Richard Huntsman. Richard is a pediatric neurologist working in the Department of Pediatrics in our university and college over the past 13 years. That's what Richard is telling me. And he is also the part of a fantastic new down from the bottom initiative called Cannabis Research Initiative of Saskatchewan, or CRIS. Really a combination of at least 40, this is what Robert Laferis was telling me, at least 40 members who are interested in exploring the opportunities from this amazing presence of the receptors in central neuron systems or in immune systems. So this is Chris. Coming back to Richard, Richard is a pediatrician. He trained both in Alberta and in Nova Scotia. And then he came 13 years ago to be neurologist and to treat the sickest of the sick kids, the kids that suffer from intractable disease called epileptic encephalopathy. But Richard is very much better equipped to tell you about this amazing story born in Saskatchewan. I am giving you Dr. Richard Huntsman. Richard.
Can everybody in the back hear me? Or do I need to speak a little bit louder? We're good now? Oh, go up a little bit higher. Maybe I'll lean in a little bit closer. So I'm very honored to have been asked to give this talk about our group's journey into this research area. But before I start my presentation, I'd just like to say that I wandered around the posters, and I have to say that the posters that you guys have done are really incredible, and you should all be very proud of the research that you're doing, and that your preceptors should also be very proud of the work that you've done. So I think you all deserve to give yourself a good pat on the back, or lean over and give the next person sitting next to you a pat on the back, because you do deserve it. So, as Dr. Radomski alluded to, I'm going to give a little talk about our journey in this very exciting area of research in cannabis. And the way which I thought I'd do it is sort of start off initially is just actually do a little bit of an introduction to cannabis, just a few slides about the plant, about the cannabinoids, which are the chemicals we're interested in cannabis, and a few slides about the endocannabinoid system. And my area of interest is kids with medically refractory epilepsy, and specifically a group of kids with something called epileptic encephalopathy. So I'm going to talk a bit about the epileptic encephalopathy, so you'll have a background as to why I chose to do the research that I did. And just to give you a warning, I do have a video of a child having a seizure, just to demonstrate the severity of these diseases. But I'll give you a warning just before the video's played. And then kind of that initial question when we're dealing with these kids with the epileptic encephalopathies, how we started off our initial study, looking at cannabis use, or the use of cannabis to treat these kids, and then how it evolved into a research group. I'm very much a clinician, and I started off here purely as a clinician. But it was really with this question and our group that I've really become interested in this research, and it's kind of really taken off as I look at, or it's really become an important part of my career. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to cannabis. So cannabis, and specifically we're talking about the cannabis sativa plant. And it's an amazing plant. From just the chemical complexity that this plant produces and the potential of therapeutics that this plant has is mind-boggling. So right now, we know that cannabis produces around 140 cannabinoids, which are the main biological active compounds in cannabis. The two which we know the most about, THC, that's one gets you high, and CBD, which is the one we're looking at for epilepsy, are only two. And there's 138 others that we really don't understand, or we have very little knowledge of. So the potential for research is incredible. And then you throw on top of that a group of compounds called terpenes. So these are the aromatic compounds which give cannabis its very distinctive smell. So when you're walking along the river on Friday night and you get that certain aroma in the air, well, that's because of the terpenes. And there's hundreds upon hundreds of terpenes in cannabis. And once again, these are also biologically active in minute concentrations. So think about you're walking along in a forest, and you smell that pine smell, and you feel invigorated. Well, that's the effect of alpha-pinene, a terpene, which is also present in cannabis. And alpha-limonene, they waft into the air of nursing homes to help calm patients down, because in microdoses, it has a very calming effect. So cannabis, it's only the female plants that produce cannabinoids, and they're produced in the flowers and the buds. The leaves, there's very little action or very little cannabinoid production within the leaves. So, as I said, there's over 140 cannabinoids produced by cannabis, and they're referred to as the phytocannabinoids, or the plant-produced cannabinoids. And they're very sort of structurally conserved. So they fall into 6 groups, these sort of aromatic compounds. And the groups are really divided up into the structure between this first and second aromatic ring. And then based on that structure, on that binding in between those rings, they fall into the different groups. And then within each group, there's R chains here. And it's a variability of those R chains that give you the individual cannabinoids within that group. So here is the THC family of the ones which get you high. And look at CBD, look how similar it is. And there is no psychoactive effect of CBD. So even though they're extremely similar to one another, they have very different effects in the nervous system. So what do they work on? As Dr. Radomski alluded to, it's the endocannabinoid system. So what happened was, initially, they discovered these receptors. So kind of like a rebel without a cause, these were receptors without a ligand. They knew they were G-coupled protein receptors, but they didn't know what they did. They didn't know what they binded to. And it really wasn't until THC was first isolated in the 60s, and then the synthetic cannabinoids were developed, that we actually started to realize what these receptors did. And this led to a recognition of the endocannabinoid system, which and the endocannabinoids are our body, because there's no point in having receptors for a product that we don't produce, our bodies don't produce. So it led to a discovery of these endocannabinoids. So these cannabinoid-based chemicals that our body produces ourselves naturally. And so over time, it's become clear that the endocannabinoid system plays an extremely important role in the body, in particular the nervous system. In actual fact, the endocannabinoid receptor CB1 is probably one of the most prevalent receptors within specific areas of the brain, in particular the frontal lobes, the hippocampi, basal ganglia, etc. And they play a myriad of roles. There are roles in the development of the nervous system, so they're very much involved in fetal growth and development of the brain, but also in the neurological functions that we have as adults. Things such as pruning of memories, anxiety, appetite stimulation, etc. And so they have this vast role within the brain. One of the things which actually I found quite interesting is that we used to think that it was the endomorphin system that was the cause of the runner's high. In actual fact, it probably is the endocannabinoid system and its connections with the dopamine pathways within the base ganglia. And there's another receptor, CB2, but that's more expressed in the lymphatic tissue, in the immunohepatic system. So they're very different roles within the body. So I'm going to switch gears now and talk a little bit about what my clinical area of interest, and these are the epileptic encephalopathies. So these are the kids that have the worst of the worst epilepsies. And these epilepsies in general are extremely severe, associated with progressive brain dysfunction, the encephalopathy. So it's the epilepsy that causes these kids to lose skills, to regress developmentally. And one of the characteristics of the epileptic encephalopathies is that these kids have very frequent, brief seizures. You know, some of my kids have up to 100 seizures a day. And they are difficult to treat. They are resistant to treatment. Some kids do okay with medication. Some kids do well with a ketogenic diet. But there's a group of kids with epileptic encephalopathy that you try 7, 8 medications, a diet, all these high dose steroids, and they just do not respond. Now, the tragedy of these epileptic encephalopathies is that they happen during a time of brain development. So if you can imagine, the brain is developing, all of these neural pathways which make you an adult, what you are as an adult, are developing. And on the background, you have this chaotic, terrible epilepsy, all of these seizures and encephalopathy. Well, because of this, these kids are left with long-term residual disability, severe mental handicap, etc. So there's several different epileptic encephalopathies that I see as a peds neurologist. And so when a group of diseases has catastrophic in its name, it's very bad. And a lot of these ones in early infancy, like Ohtahara syndrome and early myoclonic epilepsy, have a very high mortality rate. They don't respond to treatment, they seize and seize and seize, and they die as a result of their seizures. The one which I want to talk to you a little bit about is one we see in older kids who are like 2, 3, onset 2 to 4 years of age, called Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. So we're going to focus in on that one. So Lennox-Gastaut typically begins at around 2 years of age, 2 to 4 years of age. There's usually a bit of a male predilection for it. We can see it for a variety of causes. if a child has a severe cerebral palsy, brain malformation, genetic causes, metabolic diseases. A lot of times we don't find a cause. And these kids start off with multiple seizure types. So they can have the atypical absence seizures where they just stop, stare, unresponsive. They have tonic seizures, typically at nighttime, where they stiffen, just remain stiff. Often they go quite hypoxic. These seizures can be very long and be very difficult to break. But the most devastating one is the atonic seizures. So these are the seizures where the children just suddenly fall to the ground. And because they have absolutely no tone, they can't protect themselves. And these seizures are devastating because they're unpredictable. They can happen multiple times a day, and they cause significant injury to the child. And imagine you're this child's parent, the stress and the distress that this would cause you as a parent. It's the atonic seizures. That's the reason why these kids run around with helmets, right? So when you see kids with epilepsy with helmets on, it's because of this type of seizure. We try lots of different treatments, as I alluded to, with variable efficacy. But the underlying theme is that despite doing what we can, a lot of these kids are resistant to everything that we have to offer them. So I'm going to show you a video of a child having an atonic seizure. Hopefully this works. It worked a little bit before. Okay. So you see the child having a small one. There. And this shows how the injury in these seizures happen. So you can understand why this causes so much stress and so much disability and stress for these children. So what about cannabis use for medicine and history? And actually, people clued in to the medicinal benefits of cannabis thousands of years ago, in particular in Asia and the Middle East and the Mediterranean cultures. Used for a variety of elements: pain, fatigue, inflammation, and epilepsy. And it really wasn't until the British were in India that its use for epilepsy became noticed in the rest of the world. So it was an Irish surgeon by the name of William O'Shaughnessy who was working for the British East India Company, and he witnessed children with severe epilepsy. And by the description of the epilepsy that he witnessed, it sounded like infantile spasms, being treated successfully with hemp extract. And so he wrote back to the Lancet saying, in hemp we have gained this and great anticonvulsant. And so following this, cannabis actually was one of the more common treatments for epilepsy in adults and children in the West, in Europe and North America. And Gowers, who's one of the grandfathers of British neurology, in his treatise on the treatment of epilepsy, spent quite a lot of time extolling the benefits of cannabis as a treatment. But then came prohibition. And so cannabis remained a readily available treatment that people used, and then it just fell out of interest. People stopped using it. And that's partly because there's these new modern treatments like phenobarb and dilantin came available, and it also became illegal. And that usually puts a damper on lots of things. So, but people still kind of had a bit of an interest in it. And there were a few case reports out of the US of people, having lower rate of seizure, or people having benefit from cannabis with regards to their epilepsy. But you have to keep in mind, though, that the cannabis which was used recreationally in the 70s and 80s is very different from what's available now. Much lower concentrations of THC and much more CBD. And there were a few small trials done in Latin America and in Israel which showed some potential benefit of THC and CBD, but they weren't very well designed and they were very small trials. However, everything just exploded in 2013. So there's this young girl. Her name was Charlotte Figge. She had Dravet syndrome, which is a severe refractory epilepsy. I tried every medication, nothing worked. her parents went to Colorado and put her on a cannabis extract, and she became seizure-free. And this hit social media like a storm. And then Sanjay Gupta got on CNN and talked about how he was against cannabis, very against cannabis, and he got on CNN and said, I was wrong. Cannabis has a lot of potential benefit. And he highlighted Charlotte Figge's case. So what happened to us? Well, so these are desperate parents, and they hear about this. So of course, what are you going to do? You're going to ask about it, right? You're going to ask your child's doctor about it. So a lot of parents started asking. They wanted to access cannabis to treat their children. On top of that, they saw it as a natural treatment, something which is harmless because it comes from the plant. And of course, physicians were like, I don't know. We don't know about this, and we're very uncomfortable with this because there was very little good data to support its use. We didn't know what dose to use. We didn't know what side effects to look out for. There was no way to monitor this. There was no pharmacokinetics understood. So physicians and it was illegal. So physicians were completely reluctant to do it. So as a parent who's watching your child slip away, you're losing your child, what do? You turn to Buddy Joe on the corner and you get cannabis from him, and you try to make up an oil at home. And this became really dangerous because these parents had no idea with best intentions, had no idea what they were giving their children. So I got asked about cannabis every day in clinic. And I got tired of saying, I don't know. We don't know. And it was one of my colleagues and I, we were discussing this. We said, we really need to try to do something about this. And so what do we have to do? Well, I think we need to develop a study that answers some of these questions about dosage, safety, etc. And the big elephant in the room, will these kids get stoned from cannabis if we use medicinal cannabis? Because that's one thing as a physician we can't do. And we also realized that in order to do a study, because this is such a controversial area, when I started talking about entering this area, one of my mentors who trained me told me, if you do this, you're going to destroy your career. Just forget having any kind of career if you take this on. So we realized how controversial this is. We had to get external funding. We couldn't get funding from one of the cannabis companies, one of the licensed producers. And we needed a multidisciplinary group. There are things which I just did not know how to do. I didn't understand pharmacokinetics. I didn't understand the basic sciences or the pharmacology. But one thing is we live in Canada. And that gave us an advantage because we have Health Canada. Health Canada kind of sets the rules for everything. So I had to go through Health Canada to get approval. I didn't have to go through every single province to try and get approval. So we actually had an advantage here. So we started the CARE study. So it's a cannabidiol in children with refractory epileptic encephalopathy study. So it's a phase 1 study run out of the Department of Pediatrics, and I have to say, my department is so supportive of me when I brought this up. So I remember talking to my department head and basically saying, I'm going to give marijuana to kids with epilepsy. But when I explained it to him, the rationale, he was, yeah, you have to do this. We need to support you. It's an open label dosage escalation study because we still don't know what the optimal dose for these kids is. And we try to answer these questions about CBD and THC, and I think that a small amount of THC is actually beneficial for treating epilepsy. We look at we've designed pharmacokinetics in there, and it's fully externally funded through SHERF, the Jim Patterson Children's Hospital Foundation, so that people can't say that we're biased, because I know that this type of research gets critiqued quite considerably. And we had to get approval from Health Canada and ethics. And I have to say, without the help of the Clinical Trial Support Unit, we wouldn't have gotten ethics approval, because it was a fight getting ethics approval at all the other sites. Once again, because they were scared that we were going to give cannabis to children and make these kids stoned. So there's 4 sites in Canada. We're recruiting 28 children. So far, we've got 17 recruited. Aged 1 to 10 years, treatment-resistant epileptic encephalopathy. They come in for visits, and in each visit, we gradually increase the dosage as a schedule to increase the dose of the cannabis extract that we're giving. And they get EEG. As a neurologist, I'm very interested in quality of life. And I think the quality of life of my kids is just as important as seizure control. So we're looking at that. And we're also doing pharmacokinetic work and looking at levels of the cannabinoids, specifically THC and CBD, and we're monitoring their seizures with seizure logs. So I kind of went from somebody who is a clinician and they dabbled a little bit in research into somebody who is doing a multi-center study on a substance which was basically illegal at the time. So I kind of dove headfirst into this, and there were a lot of challenges. It was very eye-opening on how I did this, but once again, without the support of the college, of my department in CTSU, with their support, we were able to do this. So one of the problems is that we were working with a controlled substance, and the regulations changed 3 times during the time that we were developing the study and getting our funding. So we had to change our protocol. I think we went through 20 different protocols to account for that. We had to get ethics and an institutional approval at each site, and this was challenging. It took us a year battling with UBC to get ethics there. UBC of all places, and they were so hung up on the THC, and we're going to get these kids stoned. We're like, no, we're not. No, we're not going to. We had to develop all of these monitoring plans, all of these records, all these things which hadn't been set up before in a database, which hadn't been set up before, and we had to do this in CTSU, help me with that. And we had to find a producer that could give us a product that we could trust. So I had to know exactly what these kids were getting, and so we were able to do that. So I'm going to give you one of our patients. So this is Johnny. So Johnny he's 6 now when he entered the study. So Johnny had Lennox-Gastaut, and he failed multiple medications, ketogenic diet, high-dose steroids. When he entered the study, he was on high doses of 4 meds. He was stoned on his meds. And unfortunately, Johnny went into this pattern on his EEG. This is called continuous spike latency. So this is 1 second. Between here and here is 1 second. All of these big spiky looking things are epileptic discharges. So basically, when Johnny fell asleep, he went into a continuous seizure when he fell asleep. This is extremely difficult to treat. Most kids, we can't treat it. And just think about it, sleep is when your brain restores function, etc. Well, he can't do that, so he was losing skills rapidly. Johnny, by the time Johnny was recruited, his life was basically seizing, screaming, and drooling. And that was Johnny's life. And his mom was just desperate. And so we entered Johnny into the Carey study. So at our 4th visit, so he's on the cannabis oil, Mom comes in and goes, there's something in that stuff. Well, yeah, of course, it's cannabis oil. And she goes, no, he hasn't had a seizure in 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, sure. And she goes, and he's smiling now. And he actually is starting to try to crawl, something he couldn't do before. So this actually is really interesting. But that's objective, right? So I wanted something subjective. So we looked at his EEG. Normal. I couldn't believe it. We don't see this often with continuous spike latency. As the study progressed, Johnny kept on gaining skills, more interactive. When he watches a movie, he cries at the sad bits and laughs at the funny bits. And Mom's best comment is, I have the little shit back, because now when he does something, when I want him to do something he doesn't want to do, he'll pretend to be asleep. Something he could never have done before starting this. So I was just blown away by this. So what is that data? So we've had 7 kids, well, we've got 6 kids complete the study. We've got a 7th child who's on his last visit, and we've had a few kids from BC finish the study as well too. But in the Saskatoon site, of the 6 kids that have completed the study, remember, these are kids that have failed multiple anticonvulsants, and the likelihood of them becoming seizure-free on another anticonvulsant is 2 to 5%. Not very good. So, 2 kids seizure-free, which was quite remarkable for us. 2 kids had a greater than 65% reduction in seizures. Once again, we would not expect that with a med. And most participants saw benefit at around 8, So most kids started to see benefit. We calculated the visit 4. So when they're about 8 to 9 milligrams per kilogram per day of CBD. And one of the things we noticed, we weaned them off the drug at the end of the study. But even though we weaned them off it, their seizures continued to improve, suggesting that there's some unknown long-term anticonvulsant effect of cannabis that we're not aware of. But what about quality of life? So these are our quality of life scores over time, over visits. So we had the most improved, all the kids had improvement in their quality of life. And it seems to be independent of seizure control. There's something in cannabis and with CBD that makes these kids brighter and more alert. Does it counter some of the effects of the drugs, of the other medications they're on? Or is it independent? We don't know. But what we found is that the greatest improvements were in the cognitive and emotional functioning subscales. But even after we stopped the study drug, those improvements persisted as well too. Now, one of the things which we were worried about was about pharmacokinetics. We looked at CBD and THC. And what we found is that for most kids, it was linear pharmacokinetics. This hasn't been described before, except for one who sort of showed non-linear pharmacokinetics. So I think from that we can take that we need to be careful, especially at higher doses. But most importantly, the THC levels remain low. So from this we can say we have actually good evidence now. We don't need to worry about the kids getting stoned on THC when we're using these products to treat epilepsy. So these are kind of our conclusions that it's safe. We think the target dose is 8 to 9 milligrams per kilogram per day, and that there's maybe some non-linear pharmacokinetics, but also intoxication is unlikely to occur, because that's one thing which really prevents neurologists from wanting to prescribe these products to kids. But as the study continued, and we had this group of people working on it, we had a pharmacologist, clinical biochemist, and a pharmacist helping us with this work on this team, we realized that, oh my gosh, the more we actually get, the more answers we get, that gives us 10 questions that we have to answer. And so we realized that we couldn't just let this die with Carrie. We had to continue and to take this forward. And the only way to do that is with a multidisciplinary group. And we realized that really we wanted to focus, we want to be unbiased. We want to look at the benefits, but also the potential harms of medicinal cannabis. So we really we sell ourselves as an unbiased research group. There's a lot of polarizing views out there about the medicinal benefits of cannabis. So one of the things I learned about doing this type of research is, so when you get mentioned on Facebook, never look at the comments afterwards, because some of the comments were just awful. And it was completely opposite. Some comments were, this guy is evil, giving cannabis to children, what's he doing? This doctor is an idiot. Doesn't he know that cannabis cures everything? So, these polarizing views out there that we need to counter. We need to give a rational, evidence-based data or information to patients and healthcare providers. And the best way to do this is not just one person or 2 people, but to have as many people with different interests in this in a multidisciplinary group. So we formed the Cannabinoid Research Initiative of Saskatchewan. So it started off as a small biomedical group, looking really at the neurosciences, the clinical sciences aspect of it. But over the last 2 years, it's just snowballed. And it's kind of grown into 4 main pillars, so the biomedical pillar persists. But now we also have the agricultural pillar, because there's a lot of interest about the agricultural side, like breeding plants with specific concentrations of THC or CBD or terpenes, and public policy. And also the most important thing underpinning all of this is getting that information out, knowledge translation. So being able to take the data that I get from Kerry so that we can give it to patients and say, you know what, this is what you need to know if you're going to do this. And we've also developed quite a few international collaborations too. And this has actually been really fun. You know, talking to people in Australia and California that are interested in this too and want to work with us. It makes it really exciting. And so I really enjoy this aspect of my job. So I'm going to talk about now 2 more slides about being a clinical researcher and what are the clinician researchers. And certainly there are some advantages to being a clinician researcher. I think the best one is you know, as a clinician, I hear from my patients the questions that they want to answer. So Kerry came from patients coming up to me and saying, what about cannabis? Can cannabis help my child? I don't know. Okay, well, let's find out. But the other thing too is I get to see firsthand the results of the research we're doing. So I still see little Johnny, probably every 3 or 4 months. And every time his grandmother cries and she's in clinic. And I always have to ask, are these happy tears? Are these sad tears? Oh, they're happy tears. And you don't, and as a clinician, that it just makes you feel so good. And when part of a multidisciplinary group too, I can, you know, as a clinician too, you can sort of say, well, you know what, guys, this is what my fellow physicians, my pediatrician colleagues, this is what they need to know. This is the information that we should give them. But there are challenges. I'll be completely honest. And probably the biggest challenge is balancing that clinical workload and academic workload. And you know, patients always come first. You know, if you really enjoy what you're doing and you have a great group of people to work with, it actually makes things just so much easier. So the other thing which I found out too is, once again, I sort of dabbled into research before I entered this. And then this topic came along and it just gripped me. It just fascinated me. I had to know more about it. Plus, it also let me be a bad boy of pediatric neurology, so I'm the cannabis researcher, which actually I kind of like. But, you know, you've got to find something that just drives your passion. And once you have that, then everything else just falls into place. I like a multidisciplinary group. I love working with my CRIS group. I'm not going to say my CRIS group, with the CRIS group, because it's not my group. I'm just a small part of it. But you know, it's the things I learn from my colleagues is incredible, and the insight that I get from my colleagues in pharmacology, neurosciences, etc., which I just wouldn't learn as a clinician, and I hope they learn a little bit from me as well too about the clinical aspects. But you know, I think that makes it really interesting. And I think the other thing too, which is important too, is that you work with people you enjoy working with. Because with Chris, you know, the way I describe it is it's like, well, we've all become really good friends, and it just makes those collaborations and that work just so much easier to do. I enjoy working with the CRIS group. It just, you know, the work, it just, as I said to one of my colleagues, it doesn't seem like work. You know, it's just so much fun. But, you know, it's frustrating. I dove in headfirst with a multi-center clinical trial. Maybe I shouldn't have done that, because, you know, we're getting lots of difficulties with the sites that we're having to deal with, but you know, I chalk that up to a learning experience. But start small and gradually build up. And keep grounded in your small successes. There have been many nights after frustrating emails from the other sites or from ethics or and where I've been up at night going, why the hell am I doing this? Oh God. And then I think about little Johnny. I go, yeah, that's why I'm doing it. So just keep grounded in that. And also, once again, I can't stress this enough, having good colleagues is invaluable. And I have to say, I lucked out with my colleagues. So I hope that you guys will too when you take off on your research careers as well too. And that's probably the most important advice that I can give as a clinician is pick people to work with that you enjoy working with, because it just makes your work so much better and more enjoyable, which just keeps you going. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Richard, for this wonderful presentation and such a passionate case for working together. And we are all of this with College of Medicine, College of Pharmacy, allied colleges, so it's absolutely crucial. Actually, I'm sure that Richard would mind some questions. So would anyone would like to ask Richard a question? I'm sure that he will be happy to, and I can just twist his arm to answer the question. How is that?
The only caveat is my colleagues from pediatrics aren't allowed to ask Dean questions. Only nice questions.
Okay, let's start from Tim.
I'll just ask you, Richard, what's the mechanism of action, and do you think that persistence of drug effect, even when you stop the drug, is it because it changes the levels of neurotransmitters, or does it change upregulation of different neurotransmitters?
I'm sorry, could you
repeat it?
So Dr. Bradley asked, what do we think is the mechanism behind this long-term effect we see with the cannabis? And the answer is, we don't know. So when we started seeing this, I guess the big question is, well, could this be because there's residual biologically active metabolites? And we know that with THC, well, actually with CBD, one of the biologically active metabolites, actually the levels after chronic use, the levels are much higher of the metabolite than of the CBD. So we've added into our protocol now at the final visit that we're actually testing the levels of the cannabinoids and metabolites to try and answer that aspect. I don't think that's the case. There is some evidence that cannabinoids, so the endocannabinoid system, can cause epigenetic changes in the way that neurons work. But I don't know how much I can relate to CBD, because the anticonvulsant effects of CBD aren't really felt to be mediated by the endocannabinoid system. It's a completely independent set of pathways. So I don't think we have a good answer for that. So that's another research. Would be a really good summer student research project. Yes, hello.
So you mentioned how well your people did who completed treatment. One of the problems with that is that you miss people who might have had adverse effects, and so people do this intention to treat analysis. So I'm wondering if you included everyone to the initial groups they were assigned, even if they dropped out, what those results would be, would they still look good?
So so the design of the study itself is an open label study, so everybody got treated. Now, one of the things that we've learned from some of the other sites is some of the patients didn't tolerate it as well. And so we had to drop. So we actually built into the protocol, if kids don't tolerate it, that we go back down to the dose that they tolerated, and they just stay on that dose throughout the rest of the study. But once again,
how many would have had trouble tolerating it from that group?
Well, all 7 kids here tolerated it at the U of S site. It was 2 kids at the UBC site so far. One had to drop down the dosage. So once again, I think that gets down to pharmacokinetics. What are the levels? And possibly pharmacogenomics as well too. So we're trying to add into the study now, because as we're getting this information, we go, we need to look at this. So we're trying to add in pharmacogenomic analysis as well too. I know it started off as a very simple study, And it's just become more and more complicated as time goes on, but that's what makes it interesting. Dr. Berg, she promised me she'd be nice.
I was just wondering if you can explain how the 1-to-20 ratio of the THC and cannabis is maintained in the product that you're prescribing,
Right. So,
and whether or not it has to, if it stays in a solution, if it has to be shaken, how they store it.
okay, so it's so the product we're using, it's for cannabis.
Would you repeat the question?
So the question is really, how do we maintain that 1-20 ratio in the product? So it's so the product we use, it's for Canamed 120. So for every milligram of THC, there's 20 milligrams of CBD, and it comes. So with a product, it went through for the study, it had to go through very rigorous internal and external validation as to the concentrations of the cannabinoids. We also looked at CBC, cannabinoid, which is the second most common cannabinoid, or the third most common. Now, the challenge is we're using a plant-based product. So even with exact same extraction techniques, there's going to be variability in batch to batch. So to counter that, it all comes from one batch for our study. And it's stored cooled in dark bottles. And from what we understand, actually, the storage, it should be stable in prolonged storage. So that's how we maintain it to the best as we can. But the limitation is it's a plant-based. It is a plant-based product. Hello. Have we seen negative side effects? So yeah, so we did. The most common side effects that we saw were, and once again, this is something that you learn as you do the study, is a lot of the kids were reporting sleepiness and irritability. Now, the only thing is, and once again, you kind of learn as you go along. I chalked this up to a learning point. We didn't actually ask about that before they started. And I know these kids because they're my patients. I've been following them for years, most of them for years. They're sleepy and irritable before they started the study drug. So that is a flaw. That is a flaw in the study. Did their sleepiness and irritability increase proportionally to dosage? No, it didn't. Some kids had diarrhea, probably to do with the amount of oil, because it's a product. So the stuff, it comes in these little bottles, and they were getting, and so it's a cannabis extract, it's a cannabis extract, and it's diluted down in olive oil. And these kids are getting like 5 mils, 6 mils twice a day of olive oil. So yeah, they're going to get diarrhea, and the stuff stinks. To me, it smells like the stuff you scrape out the bottom of your oven. One of the patient's parents described it perfectly. He goes, "It smells like Vancouver."
There's a difference between different intake methods, like smoking resin versus eating the oil, if that causes a different pharmacokinetic response.
It does. So, Dr. LePerry is our pharmacologist. I'll try to answer this question as best I can. So, if you eat cannabis, or if you smoke it, we'll start with smoking, that's what most people do. So, if you smoke cannabis, okay, we'll talk about THC, because I think that's one which people know, the Richard study. So, your THC levels in cannabis, if you smoke it, go really high really quickly, but then they drop down quite quickly as well too. So you get a high, a short, brief high quickly, okay, onset high. If you eat cannabis, just the way it's metabolized, the levels are not high, but the actual effect, the clinical effect is more, because what happens is then it gets metabolized more into an active compound. And there's longer time for it to cross the blood-brain barrier. There's more active compound, so there's a delayed effect, but the levels are lower of the THC and the active compounds. but for some reason the clinical effect is high. Am I right, Dr. Yeah. So if you're at a party and somebody gives you a brownie, okay, and you take that brownie, it's legal now. Don't take a second brownie because don't do that.
Brownie analogy. Any other question? Can I have the last one? And the last
Sure.
one would be both to Richard and Robert. Guys, if you come up with a very selective, very potent CB1, CB2 or mixed analogs, do you think that the potential of such a selective agents to treat the refractory epilepsy would be greater? I know I'm just fishing. I'm just trying to get you to go on a fishing trip. Robert.
Sure. So for my part, if we had a highly selective CB1 activating compound, it's likely that that compound would also be intoxicating, so you're more likely to see the highs associated with THC. What may be of more benefit is if we can find other routes to amplify the body's endogenous cannabinoid system, which in theory might not be intoxicating, but still produce all the benefits that we associate with endocannabinoid signaling.
I agree. I think right now we're kind of, what we have right now is the plant and the phytocannabinoids to work with, and Robert's working with synthetic cannabinoids as well too. But there are all these other cannabinoids in the plant that seem to have potential as an anticonvulsant that really haven't been explored, and so I think that's something that we need to do. So one other thing about the U of S, I don't think people know this, but we have we talk about the chickens. Yeah, the chickens. So we have this really cool resource at the U of S that I don't think anybody else knows about. So we have a flock of epileptic chickens at the U of S, and they have photo and noise sensitive epilepsy. So apparently the epilepsy is so severe that if you turn the lights on, they have to be kept in the dark, because if you turn the lights on in the barn, they actually all start having seizures. So that could be a potential resource to study. So yeah. I didn't know about this until I started this research, and I was like, wow.
And there's one in the back.
You had mentioned that after you wean the participants off of the CBD, that they retain the benefits in terms of does Chris have any plans for following those participants longitudinally to see if that's retained and also see if there's any side effects?
So what ended up happening at the end of the study is, so I don't actually authorize cannabis for my patients unless they have been part in the study. So what I told the participants was, if you do this study and we think it helps your child, I'll authorize it. If you want me to, I'll authorize it for you. Every parent at the end of the study so far, so all the kids in Saskatoon, they've all said they want to continue on with it. So I gave them a prescription. One of the kiddies, they couldn't afford it. This stuff is really expensive. So, let's say a child is getting 100 milligrams twice a day, so average dose for a 20 kilogram child. So that's 10 mils a day. So that's a bottle lasts them 6 days. That's $160 every 6 days that the parents have to spend for this. And it's not covered by the drug act, right? Most insurance companies don't cover it. Although I wrote to all the insurance companies and said, look, this really helped, and this is going to save you money in the long run because we're going to have less admissions in the hospital. So eventually a lot of the insurance companies covered it. But one family, they were on social services, and social services refused to cover it. So he actually was seizure free for 3 months. So when he entered the study, he was having on average 10 or 12 seizures a month. And he had Dravet syndrome, so every time he got sick, that's when he'd have his seizures. So after the study, actually, he was seizure-free for a couple of months until he ended up in hospital again in status epilepticus. sure cost per system, thousands of dollars. So I ended up writing social services and saying, you know, you could save yourselves a lot of money by authorizing this, by paying for this. So eventually they did. So he's back on it and has remained seizure-free. So he's the longest one.
Notice any side effects long-term for any of the participants?
No, they're brighter, they're more interactive. And we're looking, we're looking at hepatic function, cell counts, all of that. And so far in the kids that have completed it, or the kids at U of S, I haven't noticed any. I haven't really had a chance to go through the UBC data in enough detail to be able to analyze it, because the data is still coming in.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's give them. Okay. Well, in our plan, we have the presentation of awards at 2:30 that our extremely able executives, Kelly and Pat, has prepared the tallies earlier. So what about if we start the things and basically award you guys with some recognition. But before I really will get going, what I would like to say from the position of my office and my particular is how far and how much I appreciate all the posters, all the work done by all of you. You have done a fantastic job, and most of all, this is just a foretaste of a great thing in medical profession, or biomedical profession. You need to be research savvy, and you need to be research proficient. And this is just a taste, the first step. Thank you once again to all of you. And as I said, all of you are the winners. But the life is such a, like in a story, that some people are more of the winners than the others. So let's start the ceremony of naming people who will receive the recognition in also in monetary form, which is very nice. So we have the first category, and Kelly, would you join me just in case I don't want to make a mistake and be sure that when I pronounce it is true. So the first category is the community health and epidemiology, and in this competition we had 6 posters, and the judge was Dr. Tim Bradley, sitting here, and the first place, $150, not the bad price, goes to Stephen Patrick. Congratulations, Stephen. Where are you? Somewhere hiding. Okay. The second prize, and this is also a lovely $75, goes to Trevor Gallagher. Trevor, show yourself. Yes, we will of course give you a certificate and the money. The third place, $50, goes to Nicholas Nishikawa. Nicholas, are you here? Then is a second category, general and family medicine, and in this competition we had 8 posters, and these posters were judged by Dr. Viv Ramsden. Viv is sitting at the back, if I can still see well. Yes, thank you very much, Viv, for judging. Then the first place, $150, goes to Caitlin Davidson. The second place, $75, goes to Christine Love. then we have a tie for the third place, and I guess both people get the $50 each. And this is Hope Fast and Michaela Kozer. In the category of medical education, we have 4 posters, and the judge was Dr. Regina Girv. And the first place only, worth $150, goes to Adam Neufeld. Medical imaging. Medical imaging, the judges were Said Shanhezadah and Dr. Heron Obaid. The first place, $150, goes to Zach Hushi. The second place at $75, Sarah Ardell. And the third place at $50 goes to Paige Throws. In a category of neurology, there were 6 posters, and the judge was Nicole Sovin. And the first place, $150, is Kevin Bach, and this is also the tie with Cara Taste. Congratulations to both of you. The second place, with $75, goes to Michelle Kushnik. Let's proceed to oncology. And there were 5 posters. The judge was Dr. Mary Kinloch, and the first place goes to Amy Brifontier. The second place, worth $75, goes to Daniel Lee. Daniel, where are you? Here. Let's move now to pediatrics. Oh gosh, 10 posters and fantastic attendance. Congratulations. The judges were Dr. Mark Inman and Oluveni Oluwole. The first place is Trevor Krisak. The second place is Sina Saidinazet. I apologize if I mispronounce. And the third place, worth $50, Sandy Yao. Quality improvement category. We had 7 posters, and the judge was Orniwiba Tamsuvan. The first place goes to Daniel Markewicz. The second place goes Ibrahim Bam. And the third place goes to Alan Chan. Now let's go to equally subscribed category. The surgery came up with 11 posters. Fantastic. And the posters were judged by Dr. Khalid Arabi and Dr. Roger Keefe. I could see Roger Keefe in a moment, but probably he left. The first place goes to, oh, I'm sorry, this is the tie. So anticipation hits the sky. And the tie is Jonathan Hepper. Congratulations, Jonathan. And equally, the first place, Laura Newberger. And number 2 in this surgery competition goes to Tanner Adams White. This concluded the med student competition. Now let's move to biomedical students. And the first category is anatomy and cell biology. Equally beautifully subscribed 8 posters. They were judged by Dr. Helen Nicol. The first place, $150, goes to Cordell van Genderen. The second place goes to Daisy Cole. And the third place, Benjamin Macmillan. Biochemistry, there were 3 posters, and the judge was Dr. Maruti Upadapati. And there's only one place awarded, $150 to Riley Griffender, but she's not here. Nevertheless, microbiology and immunology, 5 posters. They were judged by Dr. Sidney Hayes. First place, $150, goes to Shini Lin. The second place, $75 to Aurora Lipsebeda. In physiology, the 6 posters, the judge was Dr. Kim, the judge was me, actually. and through my judging, it was decided that the first place, $150, my own very, very strong congratulations, goes to Julia Newton. The second place goes to Kirk Hahn. And we have a tie for the third place that goes to Shannon Hoyin and David Kim. That concludes the award ceremony, but before I will say see you next year. First and foremost, I would like to thank our students. You guys were absolutely fantastic. Your level of engagement, interest, and professionalism are really sky high. I congratulate you, and I am absolutely thrilled. My equal sincere gratitude goes to all the supervisors and mentors, because without the supervisors and mentors, you couldn't be at the place you are on right now. So let's give our thanks to the supervisors. And last and not least, I would like to thank my colleagues in my office who were looking after the program. Kelly is here, and Patricia is probably somewhere in the back with Chelsea. Thank you, guys. See you next year.